Hey, second grade, welcome back to writing today. We're going to go ahead and get started with lesson 5 today, and we're going to start talking about informational writing, and we're going to focus on lab reports, which are pretty cool. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and our PowerPoint for lesson 5 so we can get started on day 1. So lesson 5, day 1, step 1, we're just going to learn about informational writing today. We're going to focus on what it means and what you get from informational writing and what a lab report even is. So as we read today, we are focusing on step 1, and we're going to find out what kind of writing we're working on, and we're going to read a model, a mentor of the type of writing of a lab report today. So Herschel is taking us on this path, and he's getting us ready and set up for success. So you are going to need your iReady writing book or paper, but you're also going to need a green, yellow, and red marker or colored pencil to annotate in your book with, or be able to write down what the beginning, middle, and end has, some way of showing that you are following along and listening to our writing and focusing on a lab report. So as you're getting that ready, I want you to listen. Our objectives for today are I can identify an informational diary entry and I can analyze a mentor text. So today we are going to be on page number 132 in our iReady book, or if it's attached to Schoology, you can follow along there. Lesson 5. So today you're going to continue learning about informational writing, and we will read a mentor text that you can use as a model for writing. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with, well, what is informational writing? Looking at that red, bold heading right here. So informational writing uses facts to tell about something real. Writers explain what something is or how something works. So informational writing has 3 parts, like we always talk about: a beginning that introduces the topic, a middle that tells facts and details about the topic, and an end that sums up all of the information. It wraps it up and says, from what we've learned, this is the most important things. So we have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and that's really important. So explain. So what is the goal of informational writing? The goal of our informational writing is to explain or tell about something real, or to share information using facts and definitions. So it's going to be important that we're able to look up information and define and tell people what words and things mean. So how do you think informational writing is different from narrative writing? Think about our story and our narrative diary entries we just wrote. So it's definitely different because in our narrative diary entries, they're imagined stories usually. They use facts, but they're not real events taking place, and it's like a story. But informational writing is always about something real. It always gives you facts and just states the information for you. And lastly, where do we see informational writing at school? Where do you think we see that? Well, we definitely read about them all the time with closed reading, right? Those nonfiction passages that we read about different people and we follow those timelines, those are informational writing pieces. And we also, if you have directions to follow on your homework, that's informational writing. If you have activities that you need to complete, it gives you information. So the mentor text we'll use for this lesson is a lab report. A lab report explains what happens when a person conducts a scientific experiment. Why might someone do an experiment? So people do experiments to learn something new, or to solve a problem, or to even cure a disease. People do research in order to get information to get to a better understanding of what's going on. So, and a person is going to write about that so that they can share what they learned and maybe help other people, or other people might be able to help them come to a better answer or solution. So when I was in college, I had to write my own lab report, and it was like a 30-page lab report. So it was really long. And I chose something that I was interested in sports and what motivates people. Do people like to get something that they can eat? Do people like to hear people telling them good job? Or do people like to just get something that they can have and keep, right? So why are people motivated to work hard in their sports? So that's something cool that I thought was interesting and I got to find more information about. So today we're going to read Leah, and she wrote Leah's work. She wrote an informational text. She did an experiment and then wrote a lab report to explain the results. So let's go ahead. We're going to turn to page 133 and read it. So the first time we read this mentor text, we're going to read it as a reader. We're going to read it to understand what it's all about. So I just want you to think about, what do you understand by the end of this? And then we're going to go back and go in and annotate for the beginning, middle, and end. So just think about reading it as a reader first. So follow along as I read. Lifting with a Lever, that is our title, by Leah Dobbs. How can you make objects easier to lift? I did an experiment to find out. I gathered a lever, a fulcrum, and an object. I used a yardstick as a lever, the part that moves up and down. I used a block as a fulcrum. The fulcrum supports the lever. The object I lifted was a book. I wanted to find out where I should move the fulcrum to make the book easier to lift. First, I put the fulcrum near my hand. I placed the book on the other end of the yardstick, and I pushed down on the other end of the yardstick, and I pushed down on the lever. The end of the lever closest to me was very short. It was hard to lift the book. Next, I put the fulcrum far away from my hand. This way, the part of the lever closest to me was longer. When I pushed down, it was much easier to lift the book. The results were clear. Using a lever and a fulcrum can make objects easier to lift. The best way is to move the fulcrum close to the object you want to lift. When the lever is longer on the opposite side of the object feels lighter. Cool. So a fulcrum is just a piece in the middle. It's kind of like if you think about a seesaw, right? A seesaw has a fulcrum in the middle that goes back and forth. But if you have a fulcrum you put on closer to one side, the part over here is going to need a lot more weight to push it up. But the part that's longer on this side won't need as much weight to push the other side. So they said her conclusion was that her lever should be longer in order for things to lift easier. So put your fulcrum closer to the object. So let's go ahead. What's her experiment? Let's just state what it was. Right here in the beginning, she states, how can you make objects easier to lift, right? She's doing an experiment to learn how to make objects easier to lift. Then what is the first step in her experiment? Well, I see in there in the text evidence, she says first. That is going to tell me the first step. The first step is I put the fulcrum near my hand. But before she's able to do that, she has to gather all of her tools, right? In order to do that, she had to gather all of her supplies that she needed to perform her experiment. State the experiment and gather it. All right. So this time we're going to read the lab report. As a writer, I'm going to pay close attention to its organization, noticing what the writer writes in the beginning, middle, and end of the text. So I want you to practice, follow along, reread it out loud or in your brain. And we're going to go ahead and work through the beginning, middle, and end. Okay. So in the beginning, we can see number one, Leah introduces her experiment in the beginning. Underline the two sentences that tell what she wants to find out in green. Well, we know the question right here, we said in the beginning, how can you make objects easier to lift? That is her question that she's going to be trying to answer. So I'm going to go ahead and annotate on here, and we're going to underline. And if you don't have the book with you, just write down her question. How can you make objects easier to lift is her question. All right, she said, I did an experiment to find out. I gathered a lever, a fulcrum, and an object. I used a yardstick as a lever, the part that moves up and down. I used a block as a fulcrum. The fulcrum supports the lever. The object I lifted was a book. I wanted to. Well, it told us to underline the two sentences that tells what she wants to find out. I see right here, I wanted to find out where I should move the fulcrum to make the book easier to lift. All right, that is exactly telling us what she wants to do and find out. So she's trying to find out where she should move the fulcrum to make the book easier to lift. All right, awesome. So now we're going to go ahead and move on to the middle. We've underlined the two parts where it states her question and what she's trying to find out. So number 2 says, Leah tells about her experiment in the middle. Underline 2 details that explain what she tried in yellow. She tried 2 different things. All right. First, I put the fulcrum near my hand. Well, that's the first thing, right? She moved the fulcrum to a part where it wasn't as long. So go ahead and get your yellow crayon out. The first thing she did was she put the fulcrum near my hand, right? She placed the book on the other end of the yardstick and pushed down the lever. The end of the lever closest to me was very short. It was hard to lift the book. Okay, that's the first thing she did. That was one whole part of her experiment. Next, I put the fulcrum far away from my hand. Okay, so that is her second thing she did, right? She tried putting it farther away. First, she put it close, then she put it farther away. This way, the part of the lever closest to me was longer. When I pushed down, it was much easier to lift the book. Awesome. All right. And in the end, Leah sums up her results in the end. Underline the sentence that tells her results in the end. Let's go ahead and read and find where it states her conclusion or her results. The results were clear. Using a lever and fulcrum can make objects easier to lift. The best way is to move the fulcrum close to the object you want to lift. When the lever is long on the opposite side of the object feels lighter. All right, so the results were clear. And then she went into all the definition, right, of what happened and what she found out. So all of this, actually, I'm just gonna box it instead of underlining it. It's gonna be easier for you guys to read it. All of this in here is her stating the sentence, stating what her results were. The results were clear. Using a lever and a fulcrum can make objects easier to lift. The best way is to move the fulcrum close to the object you want to lift. When the lever is long on the opposite side of the object feels lighter. She stated the results, right? So in the beginning, she stated her question and what she wants to find out 2 different ways. And she, in the middle, told us the 2 different ways she tried to experiment to find out results. And in the end, she gave us a clear statement on what was facts, on what she found out from her experiments. So go ahead if you need to write this down or you need a minute to underline or box, pause it here. I'm going to clear this out. So I want you guys to think about how a lab report is similar to other informational writing you have done as you finish up our writing today. How is this similar to other informational writing we've done? So that is what we are going to be writing about today. That is what I need you to write down or type into the response on Schoology to submit your work. So how is a lab report similar to other informational writing you have done or read, right? So I know from what we read today, we learned about facts. Where else have we learned about facts? Or we read about someone to gather information. How is a lab report similar to other informational writing you have done or informational writing from our writing, right? So I'm going to go ahead and stop here and I will see you back tomorrow to go ahead and start unpacking what our assignment will be. So have a great rest of your Wednesday, and I will see you tomorrow.